appears to be blood smeared on at least one of them. CNN's Pete Montine joins us. So how long did they have to experience this horrific turbulence?
Sounds like this was pretty brief, but the scene is really incredible, especially when you consider the interior panels that were broken off and the seat folded like a book, because those are pretty strong.
Right.
Kind of a barometer of how strong this turbulence was. One passenger even lodged in that overhead bin and had to be pulled out, according to one on board. Air Europa says 30 passengers received minor injuries, and according to reports, Brazilian public health officials say passengers got head, neck, and chest injuries. I want you to listen now to one of the passengers who was on board this flight.
From one moment to the next, the plane destabilized and went into a dive. The people who didn't have seatbelts went up in the air and hit the ceiling, and they got hurt. Those who had seatbelts on, not so much. Then we landed here as an emergency. They helped us on the runway. We were on the plane for 3 or 4 hours without being able to move.
The question for investigators will now be how this happened. Since airlines are getting better all the time at forecasting turbulence, it is an invisible phenomenon to pilots. Onboard radar can detect some of the major causes like thunderstorms, though important to note, our CNN weather team says there were no thunderstorms in the area at the time. There's also mountain wave turbulence, which creates shearing columns of wind. There's wake turbulence, which is created by another airplane, just like the wake on a boat. Then there is clear air turbulence, the most mysterious type of turbulence associated with none of those telltales I just laid out. It's usually bumpy patches at high altitudes. It's more frequent in the wintertime. Remember, Brazil in the southern hemisphere where it's winter there right now. The big takeaway for passengers here is to always keep your seatbelt buckled, or at least as much as you can. Hard to do on a flight like this, 12 hours long. So when you're up and walking around, going to the bathroom, stretching your legs, you have to treat it like a bit of a risk. We're going into a huge period for international travel right now. And remember, the National Transportation Safety Board says turbulence is the #1 cause of injuries on commercial flights. The good news is the data says U.S. airlines have become good at avoiding it, and passengers are really following the rules. The latest data from the FAA says 17 people, only 17 people suffered serious injuries from turbulence on U.S. flights in 2022. In 2021, that number was 6. That was the peak of the pandemic, although that number is certainly going to rise with the TSA numbers we've been seeing. A record just set last month on June 23rd, and we're likely to set another air travel record over this weekend with all these people coming home after the July 4th rush.
Yeah, the bottom line is when nervous flyers see this, or even just a regular flyer, right, they think, oh my gosh, I do not want to go through that. How do aviation experts investigate turbulence?
The big thing that they're going to have to do now is pull the black boxes and sort of figure out what the forces, the G-forces that they were experiencing in the airplane cabin was like at the time of this incident. The other thing that they'll also really need to do is pull all of the weather data. So right now we're able to see that there wasn't really a lot of strong convective activity. That's hot air rising that turns into thunderstorms. The weather team hasn't been able to see that on their radar from the time of this incident, but that'll be something that investigators will look at closely too. They will just really want to know, was this caused by something external, which is typically the cause of turbulence, or could this have been maybe an internal thing? Because during the LATAM incident back earlier this spring, that was something that was initially reported as a turbulence incident, although it turned out to be somebody leaning on a switch on one of the pilot seats that ran the pilot seat into the control column of the airplane, which caused the airplane to nose over briefly and people to hit the ceiling. So there could be a lot of factors here. We don't want to speculate, although it's something that investigators now really have their work cut out to do.
This seems like just kind of the latest incident involving turbulence. And not to out myself as a rule breaker, but I am tempted when there's a long sleep involved in a flight to maybe, take a break from the seatbelt. But I will tell you, after the last severe turbulence event that yielded some video like this, no way. I could not feel comfortable. I took a long flight from the Middle East and I had that seatbelt on. I wonder if that's the effect for passengers right now, but also what can the airlines do to try to get people to comply?
I think the airlines sort of really need to step up their game. So you think that when you're in a car, a modern car that is relatively new over the last 10 or 20 years, there's an alarm always blaring at you when you have your seatbelt. And so in a commercial flight, I think there's sort of this flip side to the seatbelt sign being on so many times. I think people have sort of come to ignore and make it sort of background noise, like the no smoking sign. We all know that smoking is not allowed on airplanes. The seatbelt sign is often on most of the time on a commercial flight. I was just on a flight to Seattle and back, and that's a 6-hour flight when you're going from DC westbound. So you can't not get up and want to stretch your legs and go to the bathroom. So it's easy for us to say, well, always keep your seatbelt on, but in reality, it's not a great practice. It's okay to do, it's easy to do 2-3 hour flight, domestic in the U.S., go to the bathroom beforehand. You can probably stay in the seat the entire time. And airlines in the U.S. have gotten really good at sort of figuring out with their own modeling, not only from the National Weather Service, but also internally where turbulence is going to be. The one thing that airlines really rely on, though, is something called pilot reports or ride reports, which is the airplane in front of you essentially saying, hey, there's turbulence here, you may want to watch out. It's kind of an old school, antiquated system that dates back to sort of pre-World War II. So really there needs to be some sort of technological advance, not only for the pilots who have to avoid this thing that they cannot see, but then there also needs some sort of technological advance for the passengers to try and incentivize them to keep their seatbelts on. I heard